Hello, 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 and welcome to the Loudcast with me, your host, Kevin McLean. I'm still here, still in my flat and leaf, and still bringing you the very best of spoken word. I'm very excited for this show. We've got an incredible guest. She is one of my tip-top faves. I say that about everyone. I'm just booking people I love for this show. It's good fun. But she is a consummate performer. Her solo Fringe show is always a highlight in my Fringe festival. I'm very excited to get her opinion. She's a bit like me, a fellow theatre kid, you know, kind of came from a performance background, so it'll be interesting to get her insight. We have the wonderful Rose Condo, and we're going to be chatting to her about all of her work, a bunch of cool stuff, and we're going to be chatting to her about the weekly video this week, which brings me to how we always kick off with some spoken word videos from the Loud Poets archive. And we're kicking off with a good one this week. It is an LP OG, the one and only Mr. Doug Gary, from our Fantastical Game Show Spectacular Fringe show. One of the weirder ones, me and Doug and Gally dancing in sequin jackets to close the show. It was bizarre, and the video that I've got for you is an indication of how strange it was. We spent a day filming some poetry adverts, and Doug did a belter of a beard oil advert. So this is Doug Gary with Now in Robert Frost.
I know what you're thinking. How did that man get a chin forest so full and luscious? Well, friends, that's poetry. The accessories of kings and gods, the wearable halo of manliness, the lumber scarf. When man first crossed the poles, magnetically drawn to look up at a never-winter sky, the beard was there. When they returned to the sea, took to the air, turning miles into marks on a map, the beard was there. When you run your fingers through it, feel the glaciers, the words trapped by our late-night conversations, the honey of our flirting, the sweat of the midnight stage, and the slow dance of growth and time. See how you're drawn in? Completely focused on what is essentially a fluffy waterfall. That's what poetry does for you. It focuses you like a rose-tinted magnifying glass. Can't say fairer than that. Ain't nothing manlier than a long beard and some William Carlos Williams. So sweet, so cold. Forgive me. Poetry. Distilled, pure from the source for men who need to grow. Now in Robert Frost.
Two roads diverge to the yellow wood. Doug Gary there with an absolutely amazing piece. What a dude. What a beard. Doug is an amazing guy. We love him dearly. Big shout out to Mr. Gary. Go and check out his work. Other people we love. This is just me being a bit of a lovey. I just miss people. I haven't seen anyone. So I'm just doing nice things. Recently, if you watched the Loudcast a lot, if you listen to the Loudcast, you'll know that we had Sarah Grant on the show. She's a really good friend of ours, an amazing artist. And her partner also happens to be a great friend of ours and an amazing artist, a great poet. His name's David Devereaux. So recently, Sarah and David got married. We're so happy, despite lockdown and cancellations and all the craziness. They managed to tie the knot. They're a beautiful couple. We're so happy for them. We love them so much. And we thought it would be nice to include a poem from David Devereaux that was really cool to put together, actually. Perry did all this cool design work to create the Bridge of the Enterprise, all that good stuff. It's a Star Trek poem. More Star Trek poetry, people. Let's see it happen. So this is David Devereaux with Bold.
Captain's log, stardate 42523.7. We are receiving a Starfleet hailing frequency from the surface of a supposedly uninhabited planet. Hopefully, this message will tell us more.
For me, Star Trek stands for hope. The hope that humanity can grow beyond its petty squabbles and boldly go where no one has gone before. I'm mostly going to be talking about The Next Generation because I feel philosophically and in terms of production value it's a better show, but you probably don't know. I like Discovery though. Discovery's good. Star Trek shows us what we can be when we grow up. Intrepid space explorers, yes, and a race that is above greed, above prejudice. A simple creed that all life is valuable and extraordinary, that this universe is filled with philosophies, and it is possible for them all to coexist in peace and to learn and benefit from each other, with the exception of maybe the Borg, the Romulans, the Dominion, Klingons most of the time. Species 8472. And it sounds so simple. There's no religion, no money. Everybody works to better themselves and humanity. Your achievements are based on your abilities and not who you are or where you came from. And yes, you can say this is all a fantasy. But so far, Star Trek has predicted mobile phones, touchscreen technology, video calling, and NASA now has a very elementary tricorder. So perhaps a socialist utopia is not so far out of reach. And yes, Star Trek is just a TV show. But the Bible is just a book, and Hamlet just a play. Format is irrelevant when you have something important to say. For me, Star Trek stands for hope. Sometimes life on this small blue-green planet can feel claustrophobic, that our troubles will send us down a road towards the undiscovered country from which there is no voyage home. Star Trek looks to the sky, defiant and bold, and says, that is where we will go, where no one has gone before.
That was David Devereaux there with Bold, and so a big congratulations to him and Sarah. We love you dearly. We cannot wait to celebrate with you. But for now, we're going to keep moving on to our sort of weekly video, the new release section of this show, and it is a poem that I was blown away by when I heard it live. It's from Alicia Pure Muhammad. It's a poem called Hinge, and her debut set with us, the first time we'd had her on, was breathtaking. A real solid performance of just excellent writing, beautifully delivered, with a lot of control and poise. Alicia's incredible, and it's no surprise that she's gone on this year to win the Edward Morgan Award, which is crazy. It's a huge deal, and we're very proud of Alicia. We're very happy for her and for Colin Bramwell, who was a runner-up. It's amazing to see spoken word artists doing some incredible writing getting the credit that they deserve. So sit back and enjoy this poem from Alicia Pure Muhammad, Hinge.
Tonight I am all joint and animal dark. My heel blots out the moon, vanishes the small nod of light. And yes, I prayed today, verging into my Bismillah before settling on the broken. I stoop into my longings, plot a seed in every corner. Last week, I titled another page with my body and surrendered every bending, splitting line of myself to the making. When we refer to plants, we call this positive phototropism, a body rivering toward the light. I want to river toward the light. I want to lean my neck toward a thing until I, too, become ism, scientific and named into truth. Today, I walked through a dream that wasn't mine, and I thought of you waiting at the end of it, as if to gather me. And maybe that's just the kind of woman I am. No matter how many times I have the moon or find myself in a room without a window, I know Allah sees everything, every hand planting something new, every metaphor for the tree it becomes. And yes, I prayed today, but planting my palms together has never felt like blossoming up the side of a mountain. The only time these hands have ever flowered, have ever been used for something good, was that spring at Yamnuska, where we found a clear blue door of glacial water, and I walked right through your reflection.
And that was Alicia Pure Muhammad with Hinge, an absolutely amazing piece. Alicia won the Edwin Morgan Prize recently, and you can absolutely see why. She's a tremendous writer, and it was really nice to have her in for Loud Poets back when we could do spoken word shows. Wasn't that a novel time? But to chat about Alicia's poem and a whole bunch more, I have a guest that I'm so excited to have on the Loudcast this week. She is one of my favourite poets. I make sure to see her show every year when she is up for Edinburgh Fringe. She's a phenomenal writer and performer. Everyone, welcome to Loudcast, Rose Condo. How's it going, Rose?
Oh, Kev, I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words.
Oh no, dude! You're awesome. You're very much high on my list to get on for the Loudcast. You do a lot of very cool stuff.
Well, right back at you.
How are you surviving Oh, no, thank you. How are you surviving COVID and lockdown and all that?
Well, I mean, my friend and fellow poet Louise Fazakerly called it the Corona coaster a little while ago, and I thought that was really apt. I thought that made a lot of sense. Just like, yeah, it has been since like pretty big highs and pretty big lows. And I think at the moment now, just continuing to find ways to lean into it and keep well. So yeah. Doing okay, I guess.
If I believe in anyone's ability to keep their like wellness intact during this crisis, it might be you, Rose, considering the last couple shows I've seen you do. Like, you're all about the self-care, the sort of well-being. So yeah, I could do with a Rose Condo show right now is what I'm saying. But
too bad I can't give you hummus sandwiches right now, Kev.
Dude, yeah, that would be ideal. Before we get into chatting about your stuff and some of your shows and things like that, I did just want to chat about the poem that I sent you through. I don't know if Alicia is someone that you had seen before, because I know she's kind of based up here in Scotland, but weirdly you're both Canadian, so I don't know if there's the offshoot that you might have seen her stuff before.
No, I didn't do poetry when I lived in Canada. I was involved in theatre, but I found my poetry pathways over here in the UK, so I hadn't heard of her or had heard her work before, but wow, it was so beautiful. And she, listening to it reminded me of when I listened to another poet's work, Kieran Hodges, who's an Irish poet, because it was so like richly textured and layered that I wanted to listen to it a few more times to really grasp the kind of meaning and beautiful articulation of her piece.
It's funny because I don't know if like me, because you were saying there, and I know this about you, that you have a theatre background, and I'm similar. Like I did a lot of theatre and kind of fell into spoken word through the performance angle of it. Like that was the appeal for me, and so sometimes I feel, because there's the divide, right? The idea of page poetry, stage poetry, and I think to a level that's an arbitrary divide. Like, you know, the line blurs in a million places, but I feel there is poetry out there that is, you know, it's doing a very different thing. Like my definition of page poetry is often like, it's supposed to be poured over again and again. A spoken word piece, you maybe have a couple minutes on stage and you need to convey the message fairly clearly in that time, because that might be the only time that people ever get to, you know, take the information of that poem in. Whereas stuff that, you know, people like Alicia write, which is maybe more based for, you know, publication, it's supposed to be poured over. And I often worry, I was chatting about with Katie Ailes about the poem, and I was like, I hate talking about what I deem proper poetry because I feel that I'm going to say something stupid. I don't know, what's your kind of like feel on that sort of stuff, because this is a very different style from like what you would write as well, right?
Well, and it's interesting because listening to it, I felt flickers of anxieties of days gone by where I thought, oh, I'm supposed to know what this means right away. And I thought, no, like the beauty of it being on YouTube is that I can play it over a few more times. And what I found I was doing was listening to it, thinking, I wonder what she means in writing this, and then also paying attention to how I was responding to it. Because I think sometimes when it's a bit more performative or like you say, kind of compressed into a short amount of time with a really clear idea of conveying a meaning, you're carried along in a way. And that's something I'm often mindful of doing in my work, is kind of taking the listener or the audience on a bit of a journey. And with her piece, it was like she's brought together such interesting threads that she's woven into this poem. And it made me just allow myself to kind of wonder what has led to that phrasing, you know, when she mentions phototropism, like such a scientific term in this beautiful like artistic articulation, thinking like how did that come to her to want to place it there in the poem, and then understanding it a little bit more, having listened to it a couple of times, going, what does that mean to me as well? And it kind of made me feel like, oh, maybe this is an interesting way to experience this kind of poetry. That, you know, taking out.
I think it's. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, taking out that worry of having to figure out the fixed meaning of it, and just like kind of swinging back and forth between imagining what her meaning is, trying to catch some touchstones of meaning, and then, you know, bringing my own lens to it as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely bang on, because I think I was scarred by my poetry education in high school.
So many of us were, gosh.
And I think the thing I really couldn't handle about it was like I didn't accept the idea that my teacher, or whatever the agreed syllabus was, knew what a poet's intent was when it was, you know, such an abstract piece or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was the way it was delivered as like fact. This is what the poem means. And I'm like, I never grasped that. And I'm still like constrained by it, because like all my, you know, writing practice or practice with performance was based around narrative and meaning. You know, deliver an emotional meaning, deliver a you know, subtextual meaning, whatever it is. And you go, but poetry, and the strength of some really great poets, is that the meaning is supposed to be found from yourself, right? It's you're supposed to lay it over your own sort of background. Like when I hear that poem, the lines that really stand out to me, like it's interesting you say the phototropism bit, because it was when she talked about like committing herself to the making, and I started like hearing the words, you know, sort of like religious sounding connotations, and then scientific connotations, and maybe that trapped point between divinity and science, and art lying somewhere in the middle. And you go, but that's very personal to me, and probably not at all what Alicia had in mind. But like I as I experience more poetry, and certainly more traditional, you know, like literary page poetry, I'm getting much more appreciation for like that ability to write without a clear or a singular narrative in mind, is probably the better way to put it.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of faith, which is interesting, because the idea of faith came up for me when I was listening to this piece, but also the faith that it's okay if it isn't crystal clear, because it will land possibly quite differently for different people. And something that I also find as well is that it doesn't ever feel, I guess I found with some pieces, sometimes I'll write them at a certain point in my life and then perform them a while later, and I've changed, so my relationship to those words has changed. And so I think that just further underpins that idea of it never has a fixed meaning at all.
Yeah, I love those sort of pieces where it's almost like you could easily see it about itself. You know what I mean? It's like almost self-referential in the way that it's talking about the process. You know, it is in itself vague and about a lot of different things. There is sort of very disparate images, right? Like you said, very scientific language, very faith-based language, and things like that. But like that underpins the message of the poem, which is maybe a level of uncertainty, which is beautiful stuff. I also think as well, I never put enough effort into naming my poems, like titling them. I normally just pick whatever the recurring refrain is or whatever.
Me too.
I'm like, cool. The first line is "I want," so it's called "I want." Whatever, I don't care.
It's right there in the words.
And then you see, and then you see someone like Alicia, who like the poem is called Hinge, and then from that, you know, it is a poem about bending, you know, to plant in the dirt, or bending to pray, and all those things. But in all the bending, it's to reach something higher. You know, it's to like, it just and you go like, what the title of the poem absolutely underpins the message that you're trying to get through, and it makes it much more subtle and you know, laced rather than so overt. It's I was blown away by it.
Do you know what that reminds me of too? Is sometimes when I go to a gallery and I see a piece of visual art, not sometimes, it happens most of the time, I immediately go, what's the artist named this? And I sometimes try to resist doing that, because I'm like, well, that's going to influence my experience of seeing it. But it can sometimes then give you a little bit of a like conceptual framework of what they were trying to like convey in the piece. And I think it's interesting to do that with Alicia's poem, because she doesn't she just sort of overtly mention hinge or hinging, but you go, oh no, I see how that's in the words. It's amazing.
Once you kind of go through it, it's in the process. She's such a stellar writer, and like she just recently won a very prestigious award up here, the Edwin Morgan Award, which is very well earned, and like she's very thrilled about that, because I was chatting to her about the video, and I was just like, I'm sure you're sick of being told like congratulations, but congratulations. She was like, no, it's good, I'm happy. And I was like, bravo, you own it, Alicia, get it.
I can't imagine ever meeting the poet that's tired of being congratulated.
It's always my thing when we do shows. I'm always like, and if you enjoyed it, go up and tell a poet at the end of the half, because we crave validation. Please give it to us. That's always the don't be bashful, come and tell me. Yeah. But no, Alicia is great. And it's funny because you do get I love I was talking to on our previous podcast Eleanor Livingston, the director of Stanza, and we were talking about when you kind of have to step out of your comfort zone, and when you're a booker and putting together lineups and try and find people that aren't just what your preference is. And like I said, I feel like I'm swimming in the shallow pool of poetic understanding. So like Alicia is a bit highbrow for me maybe, but like I wanted to get her in for Loud Poets so badly because she just represents like such a different tangent for us, and she is so good at reading her own stuff. There is a quality to her sort of presentation of the beautiful Canadian accent, and like she's just this sort of very quiet but I don't know, there's something that absorbs you in about her.
You know what I mean? You kind of get, I think, yeah. So it was nice to get her in for something that is probably more of a performance night, but like she went down absolutely amazing. It was really good.
So check out more of Alicia Pir Mohammed. But we are not just here to talk about Alicia. We are of course here to talk about the wonderful Rose Condo. And like, when did we first meet Rose? It would have been a Fringe, obviously.
Well, I don't know if it was. It was either Fringe or, do you remember I came over to Glasgow and did an event with you guys? I think that might have been when we first met, actually. And I remember you, I was up visiting, where was I? I was in Newcastle for a slam, and I was like, I'm this far north, I'll go to Edinburgh for a couple of days. And then I got a call from one of your team and said, do you want to come over and be part of the night? So I was like, oh, okay. And came, and you were so welcoming and lovely. I remember Katie came and found me in the bar, and I was like, oh, a fellow North American, what? And I had such a fun time that night. Yeah, I think that might have been it.
Oh, that's ace. Oh, I'm glad. Well, that's weird that it wasn't Fringe. I just assume, I think in my head, anyone that's not a Scottish poet, I assume I met them when they were up in August. But no, because that's the thing. You do a very good job at getting yourself around and about. Like I know you've done, like slam-wise, it's crazy because I doubt most people would consider you a slam poet, right? Like,
yeah.
But then you've done BBC Slam. You did the Hammer and Tongue Slam at Royal Albert Hall. You did Lingo Slam. You did the Word War Slam in Salford. Like
that was,
you've been like slamming across the UK.
That was kind of the entry point into it all, because I first kind of got into performing spoken word by going and doing the Word War Slam, and it was their first year of it too. So Kieran King, who is now my main squeeze, and Ella Gainsborough were running that, and their sister night evidently in Salford. So this would have been 2014, and I went along because a friend had invited me. She was my friend was competing in the slam, and she said, "Do you want to come and check it out?" And I remember that first one I went to. Kieran said, I guess I didn't know how it worked, and so I showed up and I was like, is there any chance I can take part tonight? He's like, oh, you're supposed to sign up ahead of time, but one of the people who's slamming is coming up from London and his train is delayed, so it might be at the last minute just before it starts we say there's a spot for you. I was like, oh, cool, okay, sure. And then
sure, no worries.
Yeah, whatever, it's fine. And then right beforehand the person arrived, and so I got to just sit back and watch my friend compete and watch it all kind of unfold. And so then the next month I got in touch ahead of time, and I was like, any chance I could come along? And so I took part in, I think, 2 or 3 heats, each like a kind of qualifying round each.
It was a big
month.
Tournament thing, yeah.
And it took me 3 times trying, I think, to win a heat, and then I won that year's championship in December, which was completely surreal because it was all so new to me. And then I started, I guess, to build up a bit of confidence, thinking maybe I could try some other slams. And it was funny because at that time I was also working full time and had a little bit of like disposable income. Gasp! Can we imagine?
For a poet?
For a
What?
poet?
I'm sure that's been dealt with now, right? You don't have that now. It's
Oh no, I don't
take
have
back
that now.
your credentials.
But it meant that I could like travel to like York for an evening because I was living in Huddersfield and go to nights there and like pop up to Newcastle for a couple of nights. And I started to not only go to slams but other spoken word nights as well, just to try and get on the open mic and stuff. And it was a really, really cool way to like build networks in the community. But it was really...
It's the only way to kind of like figure it out, because no one in the spoken word world knows how to do like marketing. Like it doesn't. No. You need to go to a night and meet like a bunch of poets who will then explain to you where all the poetry nights are.
Well, that's it. And it took me about a year and a half of doing that, going, oh, is that networking? Because I hate, like, I don't mind it now, but at the time I hated networking in a kind of professional way. It always made me feel so anxious. And I was like, oh, but this is lovely.
Especially when you don't know anyone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? No one's vouching for you and stuff. It's different now when it's like someone introducing you to some, you know what I mean? Like, it's like the boulder rolling downhill. It eventually picks up some steam, but that first little journey is, come on. Hi, I'm new here. Can I do poems? But you're saying you were entering the slams, you were ready to go. So had you been writing before that?
Yeah,
like when did you start writing poetry?
I guess I'd started writing poetry. I first properly encountered spoken word when I was living in Canada. I was working for the Manitoba Theatre for Young People, and there was this trio of poets that had traveled up to Winnipeg from New York, called the Mayhem Poets, and they were doing an hour-long show for young audiences, and it was spoken word. Some of it was choral, a lot of it was individual, and I was just blown away because I have a background in theatre and had never encountered how quickly you could like create this incredibly powerful experience through words and wordplay and rhythm and rhyme. So I was like, je suis interested. And then started to write a little bit, but fully convinced myself I wasn't cool enough to do it. And so, like, very, very trepidatiously went out to some open mic nights in the UK, after I'd moved over to the UK. So I had been writing, and I'm trying to think if I had done my show by that point, The Geography of Me. I possibly had. Yeah, I might have.
I think that's the only one of your shows I haven't seen.
Yeah.
I don't think I call that one, because I think the first full show I saw from you was How to Starve an Artist.
Yeah, that was a fun show. Yeah, The Geography of Me and my kind of getting to know slams. I think that happened kind of concurrently. So I had been writing some pieces for a while. And that show was just a kind of piecing together of some poems that I had written and kind of building a theme around that. So I kind of knew...
It's funny you bring that up, Rose.
Yeah.
Because that was something I was specifically wanting to talk to you about. Because I think I've been thinking a lot about the term spoken word theatre, and I know a lot of people who describe themselves as spoken word theatre and things like that. And I'm like, I'm very interested in, when it comes to spoken word, like performance poetry, right? We can't even agree what to call it. There's this kind of like vagary around what the disciplines are. And I think you're someone that's really interesting, because your shows, to me at least, seem like very spoken. You're like, if I was going to point at spoken word theatre, I'd be like, go see Empathy Experiment, right? Because you're a character in that show, and there's a lot of audience interaction and ad-libbing, and it relies on like the poems that are in there. You could perform them separately, right? Like if we booked you for a 20-minute set, but like their real strength is in the, you can tell they were written for that show, and their real strength is exhibited in that show. And whereas I'm like, stand-up poetry to me is like a term that it equates to funny performance poets, and I think of it a bit differently, where it's like, stand-up to me is like, stand-up comedians will have jokes that they can throw into a movie or into a script idea, but like what our show is a collection of jokes and bits. So they could do a 10-minute bit from our show, and it wouldn't lose anything from not being contextually, surrounded. And so I'm like, I wanted to pick your brain about, because I know I didn't see the original show, but I know it was more that case, right, of you doing an extended set of your work. So like, where do you sort of fall? Do you describe yourself as spoken word theatre, or what's your kind of categorization?
Yeah, I think...
Put yourself in a box, Rose.
Find a label maker and put the label on my forehead. I would say that, like, I guess I'm more aware of what I'm making now as being spoken word theater. So the geography of me was definitely a collection of poems connected by anecdotes that fit around a central theme of journey. But I knew even then when I created it, even though I didn't really know what I was doing, I still had this impulse, perhaps from having a background in theater, of going, I want to take the audience from a place to another place. I want to like create that process for them. And so that was even more in play when I did How to Starve an Artist. I was like, I want to start a bit lighter. I want to go into a place that's pretty intense and then come back out from that place, all while talking about creative nourishment and feeding your inner artist and stuff. So I think that kind of got a bit refined from the first show to the second show. And then when it came to the empathy experiment, I was like, I want to write a script. I want to write an actual proper narrative that has poetry woven into it, that feels like a definite narrative arc, So, and I wanted to make it more theatrical. What helped a bit with the empathy experiment too was I had some funding. I created the first two shows just on my own, which is why they're so kind of austere and stripped back in terms of like staging and what I have with me. And I still really like that, but the empathy experiment meant that I could have a designer to help me do that, because I had funding from the Arts Council. So that was nice.
It's amazing the difference that can make, right? Like...
Definitely. But I will also say, though, the other thing that really helped with having funding, and also probably a little more personal maturity, was I collaborated with people on the empathy experiment. And in creating solo shows before that, it's that uncomfortable, like, protective, like, I got this, guys. I don't want anyone to see it before I share it in case they tell me it's bad, And with the empathy experiment, I was like, I know some amazing people, and I would love for them to just help inform the process. So like Dominic Barry, what he did dramaturgy with me, which was monumentally helpful. And Kirsten Luckens did performance coaching and really helped me with the physicality of it. And then, like I said, I had a designer.
What a team!
Seriously, I felt so spoiled.
That's a crazy, like, Kirsten and Dom. I know them both well. That's a crazy talented team to have.
Talented.
I've never seen a one-person show with the energy of Dominic Barry's most recent Fringe show, the one about the sort of what was it called? I've never forgotten the name of Dom's show. That's tragic.
From last year, I can make you fail slightly less.
Yeah.
That one.
That's it. Yeah. I Can Make You Feel Slightly Less. Mm-hmm. Hilarious. What a riot for a one-person show. Like it felt like it was 10 minutes long. I came out going, what? Yeah. Incredible work.
Yeah. He has such presence.
But for those that don't know, I should explain. So the first sort of show I saw Rose do, the How to Starve an Artist, you like literally made, it was like a combination of kind of, you telling anecdotal stories and weaving that into poetry and kind of theming that around literal food that you would prepare while doing pieces and give out to the audience. And it was like, it's such a caring show, like the meticulous nature of like the little goodie bags and the how you create that menu to complement the poetry, and that's a weird thing to say. That was that menu really went with that poem.
Exactly. It's like pairing wine with food.
And then and then the empathy experiment, you kind of take that a stage further, like you talk about, with a more overt character of a researcher. And there's a lot of things like you seal people's phones in envelopes, and there's a slideshow, and there's all this sort of madness to it. But like what really underpins it is some really solid writing. And so it's I don't even know if it's important, that sort of arbitrary, like, this is spoken word theater, this is I guess more stand up or whatever, but like is there a way you kind of lean? Are you finding a preference in what you do?
I'm really interested.
Would you rather just do sets, or?
I think I'm leaning more towards exploring the potential of spoken word theater, even though it's got like a really nebulous definition at the moment. I think for me, for having a background in theater and really liking to do a kind of theatrical performance, whether that is in a fully fledged show or even in a 20-minute set, I always like to have a bit of theatricality to it. So I'm really interested in exploring that further. So really like consciously taking people on a narrative journey in some way, in prose that then sometimes surprisingly has poetry pop up. Quite fascinated by that.
It's a good way to look at it. It's funny as well. I do. You see this trend for like poets. They tend to then get experimental and strange and go and do something that is like poetry tangential but kind of off the path. I mean, it makes me think of like Luke Wright once told me when I first met him years and years ago, and we'd kind of first started out as Loud Poets, and we were very like, we're gonna make this badass performance night and it's gonna be all about the poems, and he was like, oh, that'll be fine, I can't wait to see what you guys eventually end up doing. And we were like, nah, screw you, man, we're gonna be cool spoken word poets forever. And then like slowly people have went off and become filmmakers and musicians and like, you know, and they take the sort of spoken word experience but they kind of spiral it into something else. It's interesting how you see it. Like you do see this pool of people to like, oh, I'm going to take it in a more theatery aspect, or I'm going to take it. I don't know whether it is a lack of a sort of like professional circuit of nights. I wonder if that would have an impact.
Yeah, I do think about that sometimes. About just the kind of like bread and butter element of it, right? Of sustaining yourself as an artist, and how to it's that whole kind of audience building question, like how to cultivate an audience that is wanting to like pay to come and see poetry. Is that in a structure where there's a number of guest spots and an open mic, or is that for people paying to come and see a show? And I think sometimes I want to like jump right in and run alongside everybody else who's kind of helping to develop that work. And then sometimes I'm just like, I just want to step back from it and like go and do a series of house concerts or something like that. Like do something that's really independent, really DIY, that doesn't feel like
well, it's funny because you see that in your work, like to an element. I like the fringe, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's crammed into these tiny little buildings.
Yeah.
But a lot, you see some shows in those rooms, and you're like, I wish this person could have a bigger space. But when I saw Empathy Experiment, I was like, this is perfect, because there was, it was quite an early slot you had at the Fringe, and so it was a good sized audience. I think it was maybe like 20-25 people or something like that, and it was perfect because it just felt you were interacting with everyone in the room. It felt like a what you call it, a census group or whatever, like a focus sort of group. Panel that you're exactly right. You're doing this research, and it did feel like, oh, this could feasibly be the amount of people you would have in for this little lecture. Like, would that translate to, the Playhouse or whatever?
Yeah.
Like, do you lose something in that? Yeah, it's
so
interesting.
I mean, it is
Whereas
interesting.
Obviously, what we do.
Go ahead.
No, go. No. You go.
I was going to say that when I was creating the show, it was I knew that I wanted to eventually take it to Edinburgh Fringe, but I was sort of doing R&D in the UK, in England, but I had in the back of my mind kind of creating it for the Banshee Labyrinth, that little space at the Edinburgh Fringe, that kind of cave-like space. In the back of my mind, I was like, I wanted to be able to work in a teeny space like that. What's been really, really interesting in lockdown is, so I did a digital version of the show. I did it online for the Bradford Literature Festival at the beginning of July, which was a huge creative challenge, because I was doing it on Zoom, and like in the show, I collect people's phones and have them on stage with me. So I was like, how the heck am I going to do that? And I also swapped shoes with someone. So I was like, how do I do that on Zoom? And so I managed to figure out a way where it kind of worked. But leading up to the live broadcast performance, 200 people had booked. It ended up that we had about 88 people attend, which even still, I don't actually know how I could perform for that many people live. Like, I think my biggest audience at Fringe was 55 people, and that was pushing it. So I do like to create stuff for quite a small, intimate audience, and then had this opportunity through the weird circumstances that we're in to perform for more people online that I could in live circumstances. That was bizarre.
Yeah. I do think with this whole, you know, lockdown process and stuff, and obviously it's something we think about quite a lot, is like how to do online content and stuff. We're a production company, so that's our whole thing. But like, it's kind of forced the hand of some folk. And I know Eleanor Livingston on the last podcast, she was saying like she hopes that is going to get reflected in the way people fund things. That there has been this thing of like, oh well, if it's not live, if it doesn't have an audience, then it's not going to get funded. And I know we've had issues getting like, you know, digital projects funded through literary means rather than through film means, because it's not a film you know what I mean? Like it's where you get into those definitions of what you do. And spoken word is one of the most malleable art forms.
Completely.
That it's like, I feel that sometimes it doesn't get the focus or funding it requires because people just want to put it in one of the other brackets, right? Okay, you do spoken word, but it's like theater. Oh, this person does spoken word, but it's like stand-up. Okay, this person does spoken word, but it's like you know, film thing, so we'll make it that. Like, and you go, well, it's actually all the same thing. It's being assisted by these other mediums. It's not the other way around. Like, it frustrates me because I feel that's where the gap comes in.
Yeah, definitely. Something else that I've seen that I feel quite excited about in terms of this digital platforming of it is the accessibility opportunities. So, you know, I've taken part in a few online gigs where, you know, if you're a wheelchair user, going out to gigs can sometimes be, I would imagine, I'm not a wheelchair user, but I can imagine there's so much that you have to consider about stairs and wheelchair accessibility and loos and all of that. And that it doesn't have to be an issue when it's online. But also with, I did the geography of me with the Yorkshire Festival of Story, and I pre-recorded it and I subtitled it, and it meant that my mum, who is deaf, and other people who have hearing loss or maybe have English as an additional language can access it and access it in a way where there's often not live subtitling at live events. So I think there's scope here for like what of this can we carry forward that still, you know, uses some of these positive learning points, you know?
Yeah, and it's about figuring out how to use them together. And it's, you know, like, of course you have to have live elements and stuff because that's, we all know there is a uniqueness to the live performance of a thing, right? And like, we should always try and make that as accessible for everyone as we can. Like, we at Loud Poets, we made the decision to move from kind of like bar venues, because in Edinburgh those are just inaccessible, you know what I mean? They're just nothing, to a theatre where we've got a hearing loop and, you know, like an elevator for access and stuff. But you can only accommodate so many, you know, wheelchairs in any theatre space and things like that. And so having a online digital impression of it where, cool, maybe you don't get the full experience of what the unique live interaction is like, but you can still enjoy and get something out of it is surely better. So hopefully it sees a push to more things. Is that something you'd look to do more of? Because I could see, like, you know, filming of like the empathy experiment, you know, to be quite an interesting thing to capture. You could do some very, you know, unique things with filming that kind of show.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was meant to be on tour with it all through the kind of spring and summer of this year, and so a lot of that's been postponed to next year, fingers crossed, if that's able to happen. But I would be keen to explore performing it online again. Also because when I performed the show, I had one performance captioned at Edinburgh last year. It was subtitled by a woman called Claire Hill, and she and her team, I think, subtitled something like 45 shows in the festival. She subtitled the online version of it as well, so if you wanted that as an option, you could. And I'm really interested in figuring out how to do that, both for like online performances and live performances.
It's very cool stuff like that. Like I know as well for sort of BSL interpreters. We've had it a couple of times where we've managed to have some BSL interpretation. We actually had a few people who were hearing impaired come to the show, and there was one woman who I think is like completely deaf. I don't think she can hear at all, and because it was BSL interpreted, she managed to like. It was the first time she'd really experienced live poetry, and it was amazing seeing the effect that it had on her. Like. Having that accessibility. Definitely. So it's something people should do more. I know there's a poet up here called Rachel Amy who's amazing, who does BSL stuff, and like there's guys like Reeves in America. Have you seen any of his stuff?
No.
He did a lot of like Def Jam stuff, and he does like poetry in sign but like speaking at the same time. It's very interesting stuff. I'll send you a link. I'll put a link in this video.
Please do.
I have the power to do that. There will be a link to Reeves and stuff like that.
That's
It's very interesting what spoken word can do for accessibility.
And I also wanted to say too, like having had the opportunity to take part in a couple of your Fringe shows, which was such a treat. It was so much fun, and I loved how you guys mashed together so many elements. And I think mash almost isn't the right word, because there was so much craft and skill, like you had film and you had music and you had stand-up and you had like it was this buffet of cool stuff that was all spoken word connected or adjacent, and it was so much fun to be part of that.
It maybe demonstrates why I'm so obsessed with like that conversation of like, all right, what is this style? What is that thing? Is it theater? Is it this? Because like I spend a lot of time as a promoter actively thinking about like lots of different types of diversity, right? In terms of like when you say diversity, people think you mean just, in terms of like gender or ethnicity or, things like that. But there's also, diversity of style, diversity of, background and theme, and like whenever I put a bill together, if we have 4 people on the show, I want one of those people to be funny, I want one of them to be thought-provoking, I want one of them to be very performance-based, I want one of them like in many different combinations of it. But I think variety is the spice of life, as Irvin Welsh would say. But like, so yeah, it's we always put it together to try and find that range, because that's the best thing about spoken word for me, is like it's so diverse in terms of what everyone's doing. Unlike, weirdly, I think what a lot of people see in the American or North American spoken word scene, which is interesting that you don't kind of fall into that because you got your start here. What do you think of like North American spoken word stuff?
I think it's something I would like to know more about, because I think the most I've encountered with it really has been what's kind of popped out in a viral way online. I haven't sought it out to learn about it enough. Quite interestingly, I've just started reading Pete Bearder's book Stage Invasion, which I'm sure you know of very well, but it's a it really digs into definitions and understandings of spoken word, and he talks. I think I'm going to get to the point in the book where there's. He looks at the history of it in North America and other places. But alongside that, I've also just started doing The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, which is a 12-week program in a book of just nurturing your inner artist, really, and discovering some perhaps creative blocks. And she suggests setting artist dates for yourself once a week. And one thing I thought of doing was making spoken word playlists. This is a very roundabout way of answering your question, Kev, sorry, but I was I'd like to know more of who has. I'd like to hear more people and see more of what people have been doing, and so I'll spend my plan is to spend a bit of time going through YouTube and making playlists of people from America, the United States, people from Canada, people from lots of other parts of the world, as well as people from across the UK, because I think that it's just going to be fascinating, and possibly there's a really kind of deep bass part of me that just misses going to nights hearing words live. So
right, yeah. So I'm going to give you a recommendation then, Rose.
Please do,
because a poet, when I first started getting into like spoken word, and I was watching a lot of Shane Koizan, I found a set he did at I think World Loud 2007 or something like that, and there was another poet there called Ivan Coyote. Ooh. And they're Canadian from the I think from the Yukon. They write a lot about like growing up in the Yukon, like White Horse and stuff like that.
Awesome.
And they do a set. It's like 4 different videos on YouTube. I'll see if I can link it for the video.
Cool.
But it's just a dynamite set, because I feel like, again, it's that thing people, think North American spoken word is very much one thing, and there is, it's a bigger scene, so there has developed a slightly more homogenous style that is, gets replicated and things, but like there are some real standouts in the North American scene, and especially Canada for me, like Mike McGee and Ivan Coyote and folk like that are doing the A stuff. Shane, obviously.
Oh, Shane Koizan is just, he's such a rock star, and I have had the privilege of being a part of a group that opened for him when he performed in York, and I always turn into such a like a complete inarticulate goober whenever he's around. Like, I've never been able to like have a conversation with him because I just go a little bit like fangirl, and it's ridiculous. But I have just written down Ivan Coyote as well, because I will definitely look that up. But I'm sure you'll put a link in too. So.
I'm sure, right, when I upload this video and realize I haven't included any of the links, I'm sure that'll be fine. But yeah, like, do you have particular artists that you sort of find yourself listening to, especially like in lockdown? I found I've gone back to a lot of my like comfort poets that first got me into it. Like, I'm listening to a lot of Scroobius Pip and Mark Grist and Shane Koizan and stuff. Like, have you got any of those standouts from the playlists?
I haven't created the playlists yet for myself, and I actually haven't listened to much poetry. I've been listening to music from time to time. I've been binging on podcasts, if I'm honest. But
nice.
I am looking forward to. I did listen to a lot of Scroobius Pip when I first got into spoken word. I had seen him at the Edinburgh Fringe, I think in 2013 or 14, and he was kind of an early like. It was an early example for me, seeing like, oh, you can create a whole show. You can do an hour, 75 minutes of poetry and story. Interesting. I mean, he was the master at it, right? He did it incredibly well.
Painfully well.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I have a bad habit of, whenever I listen to a lot of Scroobius Pip, I then write a bunch of stuff in my head, and then I go to say it out loud and realise I don't have a London accent, and so can't. It's really bad, really bad. Not great. But one thing I also wanted to talk to you, because I know we're going to be sticking about for the Loudcast Extra, and we got more to come, but I did want to make sure that we brought up, because one thing I found difficult, we're talking about like transition from theatre into poetry. We're talking about, difference, maybe taking poetry back into theatre and how all that works. But I know you're going to be publishing some work. And as someone who's coming from, a performance side, I get the fear whenever I have to put my words down on paper. Are you excited? Are you scared? Where are you at, Rose, on getting published?
I'm nearsighted. I'm nervous and excited. I'm so happy to be working with the publisher I'm working with, the amazing Flapjack Press, headed up by Paul Meads, and his Ben Mellor, who is a Manchester. I think he's Manchester based. His was one of the first shows that I saw, but his was the first Flapjack collection I bought a few years ago, and then slowly through the scene I've gotten to know Paul, and have, like you, when I first started writing, it was never with the idea of my poetry kind of being on the page to be consumed. It was always that it was going to be through performance, and then I would do zines of my poems when I would do my shows. So I'd format them on the page and then print them at like mailboxes, etc., and staple them and sell them for £5 or whatever. So I felt like I started to get a sense of how does this live on the page. And Paul came to see the Empathy Experiment when I did it at the King's Theatre in Salford, or the King's Arms in Salford, and bought one of my booklets and was like, "Oh, you've got a sense of this. Oh, okay, let's see." And he said, "Let's do a collection." And so what I've done is worked with him to. It's a compilation of my 3 shows, and I write in it a little bit of a background of each show and kind of introduce each poem, and then the Empathy Experiment is in there as a full script. But something that was really important to me in the prospect of publishing was my shows are I'm always really a fan of interaction and audience engagement, and I wanted the collection to somehow be interactive as well. And so I've a very dear friend, very talented artist, Jen McDonald, who I know from Winnipeg, has illustrated a few portions of things in the book. And then with the empathy experiment, another dear friend and amazing musician and composer composed the music. So we've got the recordings of the tracks that are played at the empathy experiment on QR codes that you can like scan in the book as you read, and listen to the music as you read is a way of trying to make that a bit more interactive too. That was very much inspired by what Steve Larkin's done in his recent collection as well.
That's so cool. That's a really good idea. I love that, the pairing of music and poetry. I know I got a poet in Scotland who works for the National Library, Graham Hawley. He released a beautiful pamphlet, but it was done like a CD cup, like booklet. It was that kind of like size and format. And then it had an accompanying CD there was a specific sort of music soundscape for each poem. It was beautifully put together and done. I mean, I'm a big fan of music with my poetry.
Yeah,
I think it really
definitely.
adds something quite a lot. Do you like working with music? I know you've done it with us a bit. Have you been other places that have done live music with poetry?
It's really interesting. So when I did it with you guys, I loved it. It just kind of gave me the feels, like goosebumps of having that music just emerge into the sound, into the ether with my words. I'd had that experience once before when I was at the Lingo Festival in Dublin. Kieran Hodges and I went to an open mic, and they had someone on piano and I think someone on guitar just accompanying people coming up to do the open mic, and I was like, this is super cool. But working with Ellie, my friend who did the music for the empathy experiment, that came about because she had seen some of my poetry, and she's an incredible cellist and pianist, and we would just jam. I would go over to her place and I'd bring some poems and I'd read them, and she'd just jam with some stuff, and we discovered we had this incredible connection. And so the work that she composed for the show was me sharing poems and her just noodling around a little bit until we both went, ooh, that thing that you just did, do that again. And it was so fun. It was amazing. Yeah.
So you were saying with the book, it's not just the empathy experiment, it's like the other two shows as well, right?
I don't have music in those shows.
Oh, no, but the work is a collection from all three shows, right?
The book is, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's like a big chunk of time to sum up into the book. That's
well, and there's a part of me too.
It's a lot of work to go, this is the definitive edition of it.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's
sorry, I'm going to freak you out worse. I'm unhelpful.
No, I know. Well, part of me was like, this is a lot of my writing. Like, what if I never write anything else? And then I was like, oh no, I've got a few other pieces. I could do a second collection maybe if I needed, But what's interesting is that it's called After the Storm because at the beginning of the collection, I talk about having part of what got me into poetry was having moved to Huddersfield and being single and working and trying to build a new community, and that had come out of having left an abusive relationship. And so After the Storm is the name of a poem in the geography of me, but I thought I'm going to call the collection this because almost all of the work has come from after the storm of having gone through that really traumatic experience. So there's that kind of personal element to it as well of going, it's a lot of the stuff, the personal stuff that I've gone through to kind of share in a crafted poetic way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's beautiful though, to be able to kind of take that collection of time, because it's like you said before, you look back on poems you wrote with a different eye, when circumstances changed. So it might be a really nice process for you actually to sit down with that, though there is a big chunk of time in writing. It's very cool, Rose. When's it coming out?
It's coming out in November. We're just finishing off the edits now. It's been quite a gift to have been able to work on it through these past few months when I've found it quite difficult to write. I've found it quite difficult to respond to things because it's been really overwhelming. And so having this editing project and working with the wonderful Paul has been really cool. So yeah, November, it'll be coming out.
Nice, that's very exciting. And you've managed to avoid the temptation to just write about COVID and lockdown, right? That's good. Well done. I'm really sad that Fringe isn't happening this year. It really bums me out, but I kind of don't want it to come back next year because I don't want all the posters to just be reminding me about this tragic year. And it's going to happen. Everyone's show is going to be about lockdown. It's going to be terrible.
I know, right? It's that tricky thing where it's like art is a good way to manifest what you've been going through. So like write about it, sure, but there's other stuff,
It was like 2017. Every show had a picture of Trump in the poster, and I was just like, I can't even deal with this.
And Brexit and all of that stuff, and it's like, we're about more than that as a species.
Rose, at least you're Canadian, it's fine. It's fine.
It's tricky over there at the moment too, but hey ho.
Yeah, right. It's you're looking better by association. It's like if you just stand next to, you're placed well geographically for not looking too bad. But yeah, how are you finding Salford? We didn't even get a chance to really talk about the Manchester scene and stuff. I know Manchester and Salford are different, Rose. Before you beat me up, I know they're different. But I'm going to say the greater Manchester scene. How are nights down there? How's stuff going?
Yeah, good, really good. When I first started coming to things here, there was so much going on in the city, and it comes in ebbs and flows, for sure. And there are still some incredible events happening. So Robert Steventon runs a great night called Punk in Drublic, which is a combination of stand-up comedy and spoken word, and does it as a fundraiser for a homeless charity as well. So he's had some really great people come through, and the guys that do I can't remember what they're called.
Verbose.
Yeah, Verbose. Yeah.
I know the guys from Verbose. They're really cool. They were nice. I met them at oh no, I can't remember the thing. I met them at the Bristol thing. What's the Bristol thing?
Oh, at Raise the Bar? Or Milk?
No, Birmingham. Sorry, Birmingham. The Milk were there at Birmingham.
Oh, was it Hit the Ode?
It's not Hit the Ode. It's the festival. The festival. I now can't remember. I was there and like.
It's because
Kevin, it's at the Hippodrome.
It's because we haven't been in face to face with people,
Yeah, I'm going mad, Rose. It's fine. I'll figure it out for the Loudcast Extra. Sign up to the Patreon to figure out whatever Kevin's forgotten. Rose,
Young Identity.
We're gonna finish
That's
up.
The one. Young Identity. Yeah, they do amazing work here too.
Young Identity.
Ooh, yeah.
Now you've shown me up. It was better when we both couldn't remember. No, but yeah, I'm gonna figure that out for the Loudcast Extra. Rose, where can people find your work? Where's the best place to hit you up?
On my website, rosecondo.net. So there's information there about gigs. Not many gigs lined up at the moment, but in futures, and like videos of my work and just general news about what I'm up to. I'm on Twitter and Instagram on the socials, so people can find me there. Yeah, always happy to connect.
And I will obviously put all the links down to that below. Verve Poetry Festival. That's what I was thinking.
And now Kev can sleep
tonight. But yeah, I will put links to where you can find Rose down below, and we'll chat to her. But before we wrap up and head off to Loudcast Extra, Rose, would you mind doing a poem for us to close the show?
Sure, I would love to. I am going to do a poem that I wrote a while ago, and I'm just gonna go into it. I have to own up about a growing affliction. It's becoming a habit, could soon be an addiction. Can I say the words out loud? The shame cuts deep to the bone. My name is Rose Condo, and I use Rhyme Zone. In case you haven't heard of Rhyme Zone, it's an online rhyming dictionary. I tell myself it's cheating. I tell myself I'm very bad, sad, mad, not glad or rad, and more than just a tad pathetic. I tell myself using rhyme zone makes me a poet fraud, which cultivates intense self-loathing. You might think it's odd that imposter syndrome is triggered by using an online rhyming dictionary, that my guilt gets overblown and becomes a heavy thing for me to carry. This self-inflicted suffering going online to find rhymes for different words seems so ridiculous and no big deal. I know how truly absurd it is about how ashamed and anxious that this makes me. And then I'm swiftly swept up in thoughts of millions of anxieties that sometimes take me sometimes close to the edge of a worrying abyss. This is bullshit. It's not the end of the world. Stop being pathetic. My inner bully heckles around my anxious thoughts, telling me it's not okay to replay moments to the point of cognitive paralysis, spinning in spirals of dizzying analysis, declaring I should have known better than doing or saying what I did. It would be better if I hid behind the pretense that I'm just fine, just a bit stressed. No matter. No mind. Find. Bind, grind, blind, aligned, combined, rewind, remind myself I have tools for this, ways to edge away from the edge of the abyss. One way to address this might be to make a list of some of the things that make me anxious, like feeling like a fraud for using rhyme zone, and the fact that nothing rhymes with anxious, or telling someone I like them, walking home alone at night, never being thin enough, hairy bugs that bite, aggressive personalities, the fact that I never floss, running into my neighbors, meetings with my boss, worry that I'm too sensitive and take things too much to heart, worry that when I've eaten lentils, I'll forget myself and fart at a social gathering where I don't know anyone, worry that I'm too serious and don't have enough fun, guilt that I don't do enough to help others in need, guilt that my first world is built on gluttony and greed, worry that on weekends away I haven't properly packed, fear that I'm immune and numb to horrific human acts, worry that I don't read the right books or listen to the right songs, fear that I'm a disappointment, fear that I'm doing it all wrong, fear of not arriving somewhere on time, fear of waiting at passport control, fear of making eye contact, fear of getting old, fear of getting cancer, fear of loved ones dying, fear of being alone forever, fear that time is flying. Okay, I say, I'll stop there and look back over my list, and while my inner bully wants to call this a pile of utter self-indulgent nonsense, another part of me says maybe try on an inner lens of kindness. Maybe instead of letting my inner bully rail, maybe instead of giving equal weight and measure on my anxiety scale to each detail on this list, so that this monstrous mash of anxieties continues to churn and seethe, maybe I can breathe back to where this began, with a lens of grace and a new way of seeing that it's okay to be okay with being exquisitely, imperfectly human and flawed. And I'm not a poet fraud for using rhyme zone, nor am I alone in sometimes being on the edge of a worrying abyss, and this space to speak up will help anxieties to ease. So let's cultivate compassionate sharing. Hashtag more of this, please.
Amazing, Rose. That is stellar stuff. Wow. Excellent. Excellent. And brings it full circle to my imposter syndrome of being able to talk about poems like a Hinge from Alicia. I do love. I've always loved that about your stuff, Rose. That you managed to take what can be seen as a very simple, funny subject. You know, something like rhyme zone. Everyone gets the gag of that, but by the end of the poem, it is something much more deep and something much more impactful, and like you always make that transition from fun and lightheartedness into something more serious, and it makes you a very easy person to connect to on stage. You know what I mean? Like, you always feel in safe hands at your show, which is important for I think the style that you're going for, right?
Thanks very much, Kev. That means a lot. Cheers. Yeah.
No, so thank you very much, Rose Condo, for coming on the Loudcast. Everyone go and check out all of Rosie's stuff. Get a copy of her book when it comes out on October, and when she's eventually able to be back on tour, go and see the Empathy Experiment. It's going to be awesome. We will be looking forward to having you up here at some point, Rose, when the world returns to normal.
I'll be there with bells on, possibly literally.
Wow, I'm going to hold you to that now. But for this week on the Loudcast, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Hit like, hit subscribe, all that good jazz, and we will see you again soon. Rose, say goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button, if you could hit the subscribe button, and make sure to ring that bell icon so you don't miss any updates from us in the future. If you want to go that extra mile and support us a little further, we do have a Patreon channel with loads of exclusive goodies, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your help, guys, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.